Japan, 1180. The imperial capital of Kyoto and much of the country is under the control of the tyrannical Taira clan. But in the east, an uprising has occurred, led by Yoritomo, the young lord of the warrior Minamoto clan. From the natural fortress of Kamakura, Yoritomo has driven the Taira from the east and now plans to attack their bases around the imperial capital and in the west of Japan. After first infiltrating the imperial court, the Taira had spent 3 decades terrorizing all sections of Japanese society, torturing and persecuting monks, carrying out campaigns to extinguish rival clans, and even deposing emperors, so that by 1180 a rebel coalition had arisen, with Yoritomo Minamoto at its head, that was determined and ready to call time on the Taira. So, whether you decide to take a train through the tunnels into Kamakura City, or take a bus over the mountains, getting there in modern times doesn't pose so much of a challenge. Even if you decide to hike through the hills, the challenges are only geographic, or maybe you'll have to deal with bad weather. But in the old days, some of the obstacles to getting into the city were not just natural. Many of them were man-made.
Legend says that this pass was cut through the mountains in a single night by a mighty samurai called Saburo Yoshihide. Well, I don't know if that legend's true, but what is true is that this pass was made by human hands, and it was cut narrow because they didn't want large armies getting into Kamakura easily. They wanted it easy to defend. So, if even small groups of hostile visitors decided to attack, they could easily block the way or pick off the unwelcome visitors with archers placed in the cliffs above. It wasn't just the hills, cliffs and ocean that made Kamakura so difficult to attack and take. It wasn't like Kyoto, a large city with wide boulevards, open spaces. Kamakura was filled with a myriad of tiny narrow streets with unexpected corners and blind alleys, which would make any invasion quite a logistical exercise.
In her guide to Kamakura, Akemiano says that these narrow, blind-cornered streets were created like this on purpose. And Yoritomo surely must have thought the same thing as he made the city his base. and many medieval towns all over Japan copied Kamakura's mazy street plan, so that if they suffered a hostile invasion, the inhabitants would have time to launch a counter-attack or plan an escape.
Who'd be a postman? But even though Yoritomo was now safely and securely ensconced in his new capital of Kamakura, after driving the Taira from the east, it wasn't to be him or even his brother Yoshitsune who would begin the war against the Taira in the west.
It was in Kyoto itself, Japan's capital and stronghold of the Taira, that Prince Mochihito, son of the now powerless Emperor Go Shirakawa, sent out a rallying call to the noble exiled Minamoto, downtrodden samurai and warrior monks and enemies of the Taira everywhere, to rise up once again, advance on the capital and rid Japan of this menace once and for all.
There was an old man living in Kyoto in those days, a poet and a bureaucrat by the name of Yorimasa Minamoto. Yes, he was a Minamoto, of samurai stock, but he was also, and more importantly, a trusted imperial court councillor. Loyal to the emperor, and even the Taira had never had any reason to doubt him. He hadn't taken part in any of the previous uprisings. But the Taira excesses and tyranny had gone on for too long now, and when Prince Mochihito made his call to arms, Yorimasa responded. But this uprising could never succeed in Kyoto. There were just too many Taira men-at-arms in the city, and before long, Yorimasa and Prince Mochihito were on the run, and they decided to try and get to Nara, where they were confident the warrior monks themselves, victims of the Taira over previous decades, would flock to the cause. But they only made it halfway to Nara before Taira forces overtook them at Uji Bridge. It was then that the Minamoto heritage in Yorimasa came to the fore. He fought bravely, even continuing to fight when arrows were sticking out of him. And when it became obvious there was no escape, he put down his sword, took out his short sword, and for the first time ever recorded on a Japanese battlefield, a samurai stuck his short sword into his stomach and ripped his belly open. Prince Mochihito, not a samurai, was captured and killed. But the story didn't end there. The Taira had developed a taste for blood, and they marched on to Nara to give the warrior monks a lesson.
After crushing Prince Mochihito's rebellion at Uji, the vengeful Taira chased the warrior monks who'd sided with the Minamoto to their base in Nara, slaughtering thousands of them. And in a fit of pique, They also put to the flame the grand temples of Kofukuji and Todaiji, the building which housed the nation's symbol, the great Buddha of Nara, which melted until, according to the tale of the Heike, it was nothing more than a shapeless mass. Go Shirakawa, grieving the loss of his son, Prince Mochihito, declared his intention to go on a pilgrimage to the Buddhist monasteries of Mount Hiei. In fact, though, after leaving Kyoto, Go Shirakawa fled for refuge to the army of the advancing Yoshinaka Minamoto.
One of the two Minamoto generals marching on Kyoto ahead of the Kamakura forces was Yoshinaka Minamoto, cousin of Yoritomo and Yoshitsune. Yoshinaka had rallied independently to Prince Mochihito's call to arms, and so Yoritomo, wanting to stress that he was the leader of both the Minamoto clan in particular, but also the uprising in general, felt he had to go to Yoshinaka's domain and make that point clear. Yoshinaka was slightly disgruntled, but he held his tongue for the time being and led his own army to Kyoto along the Japan Sea coast, scoring some impressive victories along the way. One such victory was when Yoshinaka attached torches to the horns of a herd of cattle and drove them through a ravine, terrifying the Taira, who fled thinking that a Minamoto army was attacking them by night. And so, in due time, Yoshinaka approached Kyoto, and he was met by the fleeing emperor Go Shirakawa, who requested sanctuary, and Yoshinaka gave it. So the Emperor Go Shirakawa and Yoshinaka entered Kyoto at the head of this Minamoto army, and the Taira, not wishing to fight this bold, intrepid Minamoto general, fled Kyoto. So Go Shirakawa and Yoshinaka were greeted by the people of Kyoto as liberating heroes after 30 years of Taira tyranny. But Yoshinaka, although a soldier of some undoubted merit, was also a presumptuous and boorish character. Upon arriving in Kyoto and thinking he'd got his feet well and truly under the table, he demanded that Go Shirakawa, in no position to refuse, make him, Yoshinaka, the shogun. Yoritomo in Kamakura was furious on hearing this. And so, Yoshitsune's first task in the west was not to fight the Taira. It was to bring the renegade Minamoto shogun, Yoshinaka, to task. Yoshitsune was a formidable fighter, and as good as Yoshinaka was, he couldn't withstand. Soon, Yoshinaka was fleeing, and within days, Yoshitsune's troops had hunted him down and killed him. Now, Yoshitsune was the liberating hero in Kyoto. He was given accolades and titles by a grateful Go Shirakawa and the imperial court, something that annoyed his brother Yoritomo. But Yoritomo held his tongue for the time being because there was work to be done in the west to finally free Japan from the Taira. And so, with the cheers of the people of Kyoto and the imperial court ringing in his ears, Yoshitsune headed for the western strongholds of the Heike clan. Although the Taira had fled Kyoto as Go Shirakawa and Yoshinaka Minamoto approached, they'd only retreated as far as Ichinotani, their stronghold 30 miles west along the coast, and to Yashima, on Shikoku Island, just across the straits from Ichinotani. Yoshitsune then decided to attack these strongholds, and after putting down Yoshinaka's attempted coup, and after being newly united with Noriyori, yet another long-lost Minamoto brother, Yoshitsune decided to head for Ichinotani first. Ichinotani, like Kamakura, was a natural fortress facing the sea and surrounded on three sides by steep hills. It was situated where the modern city of Kobe and the Ikuta Shrine now stand, and was easily defended. Yoshitsune, though, had a plan. As his brother, Noriyori, approached Ichinotani along the coast, drawing the attention of the Taira, Yoshitsune, Benki, and 100 cavalry waited in the hills above.
The tale of the Heike records in colourful detail how Yoshitsune's men launched their attack on the Taira base at Ichinotani.
The descent was of sand and pebbles, and their horses slid straight down and landed on a level place. From thence there were great mossy boulders for 50 yards to the bottom. Soldiers were recoiling in horror, thinking that their end had come, when Miura no Sahara Juro Yoshitsura sprang forward and shouted, "In my part, we ride down places like this any day, to catch a bird." The Miura would make a racecourse of this, and down he went, followed by all the rest. So steep was the descent that the stirrups of the hinder man struck against the helmet or armour of the one in front of him, and so dangerous did it look that they averted their eyes as they went down. "Hey, hey," they said under their breath as they steadied their horses, and their daring seemed rather that of demons than of men. So they reached the bottom. They fired the houses and huts of the Heike, so that they went up in smoke in a few minutes. After the Minamoto's stirring and daring victory at Ichinotani, the Taira were pushed even further west and south along Honshu, Japan's main island, and even their bases on the island of Shikoku came under attack as Yoshitsune, despite vastly inferior naval expertise and power, managed to get across and attack the Taira bases there. And so a decision was made by the Taira leaders, a fateful decision, to evacuate en masse to the Taira strongholds on the southern island of Kyushu. But as they evacuated across the Straits of Shimonoseki, Yoshitsune made another daring attack.
And in the Straits of Shimonoseki, at a cove called Dan no Ura, the sea dogs of the Taira, trying to get across to their bases in Kyushu, and the pursuing landlubbers of the Minamoto trying to stop them, a battle would ensue on the waves, which would turn out to mark the end of this struggle for dominance between the two clans. The Taira attacked with the tide in the morning and dominated the early stages, but would not be able to press home the advantage. In the afternoon came two big changes: the direction of the tide and the tactics of the Minamoto, whose commanders ordered their warriors to direct their arrows at the Taira oarsmen and pilots. These two factors, combined with the fleeing and even in some cases the defection of Taira and their allies, won the day for the Minamoto and Yoshitsune, who killed or captured most of the Heike, while the remnants either fled as best they could or threw themselves into the sea, as the boy emperor Antoku did. So many Taira were lost or put to flight after this disaster at Dan no Ura that the war now was effectively over. Once and for all, the Minamoto clan had rid Japan of the Taira. The swallowtail butterfly was the symbol of the Taira family and the Heike clan, who held an iron grip on Japan in the 12th century.
Now, while many of the Heike warriors died at the Battle of Dan no Ura and sank to the bottom of the sea, not all the Heike were killed. Some who survived were taken as prisoners of war to Kamakura by Yoshitsune, but others managed to escape, and others still were not there at their clan's final fateful battle. What happened to them? The historical record doesn't have much, if anything, to say about their ultimate fate.
Japanese folklore says that butterflies are the souls of bygone samurai. In the case of the Taira, after their final defeat at Dan no Ura, the warriors who did survive did indeed take flight to deep, remote valleys beyond the mountainous spine of Japan and out of the pages of history. Some of the Taira women survived, falling upon very hard times. It was they and local fisherfolk who built the Akama shrine to mourn and commemorate the lost emperor, nobles and warriors of their now extinguished clan. Surviving leaders of the Heike, the Lord Munemori, Tokitada and others, were rounded up by Yoshitsune and marched off to Kamakura, where, if Yoshitsune thought only the Taira generals would be facing their ultimate doom, he was about to receive an unpleasant surprise. Before I came to Japan as an adult, I didn't know a lot about the country, and as a young child I knew even less. But what I do remember is a comic strip in a short-lived British comic that told the story of Benkei the warrior brigand, faithful retainer of his lord Yoshitsune, who followed and defended the young hero even until he died. And their story is celebrated here too, at Manpukuji Temple in Kamakura. the deeds and events of the Genpei War were preserved and put into songs by the Biwa Hoshi, travelling bards who performed songs about tragic young heroes like Atsumori, who fell after the Battle of Ichinotani. These bardic stories finally became what we know as the tale of the Heike. Yet it is not a story of a tragic Heike warrior that the tale of the Heike culminates with.
Unlike his elder brother, raised by warrior clans here in the east, Yoshitsune was a westerner, raised by monks in the mountains just outside the imperial capital. The story Ushiwakamaru tells of those days, where Yoshitsune, living amongst the monks, had no martial skills, so was taught to fight like a samurai by a friendly Tengu, a mountain goblin, and went on to use those skills upon arriving in the imperial capital and crossing the Gojo Bridge. He was challenged to a fight by Benkei, who went out to be his faithful retainer. It was in Kyoto Yoshitsune gained the loyalty of his men, warriors such as Benkei, and the admiration and patronage of the imperial court. Perhaps it was a rational doubt on the part of the Minamoto leader as to where his brother's true loyalties lay, with Kamakura or with Kyoto. Or maybe it was purely envy that caused him to turn on the gallant young general, hero of 1,000 tales, yet destined to die at 30. And so it was that Yoshitsune, laden with honours and high regard by the men and women of the imperial court, and accompanied by enemy prisoners as a show of his loyalty, arrived here at the western entrance to Kamakura, and waited for the victorious leader, Yoritomo, his brother, to bid him enter. And he waited, and he waited, even writing a letter, which he dictated to Benkei, imploring Yoritomo to embrace his friendly and subservient overtures. But Yoritomo was angry, and perhaps he could have given shape to his displeasure that Yoshitsune had given unwarranted legitimacy to the imperial court by accepting its accolades. This was, after all, a new age where fighting men were answerable to and rewarded by their clan chief, their lord, not the emperor. Yoritomo, in seeking to stress this, decided to make an example of Yoshitsune, who, after all, he barely knew, forcing Yoshitsune to escape Kamakura and go on the run.
This dance commemorates a much-loved heroine of the Japanese. Her name was Shizuka Gozen, the Lady Shizuka. She was an imperial courtesan whose dancing, it was said, in a period of severe drought, when the emperor's advisors, magicians and priests could do nothing. It was her dancing that finally brought the rain. She was dearly loved by many, not least by the dashing Minamoto general Yoshitsune. And she loved him back. When the Minamoto leader, Yoritomo, was jealously and ruthlessly hunting down his younger brother, he had Shizuka Gozen brought to Kamakura and demanded to know Yoshitsune's whereabouts. Shizuka refused to yield, instead performing a defiant dance of devotion to her fugitive lover. Yoritomo, furious, almost executed Shizuka, save for the intercession of his wife, Masako. But Yoritomo continued to ceaselessly persecute the dancer, casting her baby son, the son of Yoshitsune, into the sea and hounding Shizuka, this most loyal and beloved Japanese heroine, to an early grave. So where was Yoshitsune? After he fled Mankaguchi Temple on the western outskirts of Kamakura, with Yoritomo's men in hot pursuit, he returned to Kyoto, but even here, in the imperial capital, nobody was in a position to withstand the iron will of Yoritomo. Nobody in Japan was, because, with the help of Yoshitsune, Yoritomo had extinguished all potential opposition, former friend and foe alike, and now only Yoshitsune stood in his way, and then nobody could stop him. So, fleeing for his life, Yoshitsune escaped through forgotten mountain valleys and forests to the northern capital of the Fujiwara, where the old lord, who had taken in and protected Yoshitsune as a youth, took him in again. But age overtook the old man, and his son had no qualms about siding with Yoritomo. So Yoshitsune and Benkei, heroes of 1,000 tales, and a small band of loyal retainers made their last stand in front of the golden temple of Hiraizumi. And after they fell in a hail of arrows and flames, Yoshitsune's head was brought back to Kamakura to prove to Yoritomo that now nothing stood between him and complete mastery of Japan. It may be easy and tempting to paint Yoritomo as paranoid, ambitious, ruthless, and bloodthirsty. But he was born into this violent world. He didn't create it. Yoritomo himself survived the deaths, the violent deaths of his grandfather, father, and firstborn son, and most of his clan. But in fairness, on securing victory, he set about pacifying the land and building a just post-war regime, loyal to the emperor and benevolent to the people.
I'm at the top of Mount Genjiyama, the mountain named for the Minamoto clan, which overlooks their city of Kamakura. And behind me is a statue of their most famous member, Yoritomo. And so Yoritomo, wielding supreme political, military and even tax-raising power from one end of Japan to the other, only desired one more thing: a title befitting his magnificence. Not the old imperial court titles like Kampaku or Nairan, which Go Shirakawa offered. Yoritomo wanted the title of Shogun, but not just Shogun of the North, a title that his ancestors Yoriyoshi, Yoshie and other Minamoto had had, but Sei Itai Shogun, supreme military commander, leader of the Bakufu, the military government, the shogunate, protector of the emperor, guardian of Japan. And upon the death of Go Shirakawa and the accession of the Emperor Go-Toba, Yoritomo, with Masako as his consort, got his title and became Shogun. Yoritomo's appointment as Shogun was the pinnacle of the Minamoto clan's achievements. After centuries of striving to preserve and expand Japan's borders, after generations of civil strife where they struggled to preserve imperial prerogative and their own, and after a lifetime for Yoritomo of existential peril, much of which was spent in exile or on the run or locked in deadly political intrigue, peace had finally come. And now Yoritomo could focus on governing Japan from its new capital, Kamakura. But although Yoritomo had desired and finally received this old, storied military title of Shogun, there was nothing old or storied about the military court and government that he created to ensure it would endure. This shogunate was completely new. It operated in general harmony with the imperial court, but distinctly separate. It would assume its own tax-raising powers over every individual and institution in the land, develop a legal framework to such an extent that people from all over Japan would converge on Kamakura seeking justice, and it brooked no military rivals to such a degree that the shogunate would endure here in Kamakura for a century and a half, and in other later shoguns' capitals for 700 years. And for all subsequent shoguns to have legitimacy, they would need to claim kinship with Yoritomo, Japan's first ruling shogun.
In Japanese, the shogunate was called the Bakufu, named after the tent screens from behind which samurai warlords would conduct their meetings and plan their military and political strategies away from the eyes of enemy archers and spies, as depicted here in the Akira Kurosawa film Ran.
The murderous purges of the Heike affected not only rival clans or dissident members of the imperial family, they affected many, many sectors of society. Even monks, Buddhist monks, were tortured and murdered by the Heike. But under the devout shogun Yoritomo, Buddhism underwent a resurgence. And this resurgence went beyond the spiritual into art, architecture, and literature. Two famous pieces of literature bookend the Kamakura period of Japanese history. Two journals written by Buddhist monks. The first of these monks, Kamo no Chome, was a contemporary of Yorimasa Minamoto. And like Yorimasa, Kamo no Chome was a scribe and official at the imperial court. But unlike Yorimasa, Kamo no Chome didn't get involved in the war, which would be the divide between classical and medieval Japan. Instead, he retreated to a shack in the woods and wrote what has since become regarded as a classic piece of Japanese Buddhist literature, an account of my hut.
For the final decade or so of Kamo no Chome's life, in which he resided in this mountainside hut, his literary output displayed the philosophical awareness of impermanence that is the hallmark of Buddhism, and which resonated with many Japanese in their late classical and early medieval periods.
On flows the river ceaselessly, nor does its water ever stay the same. The bubbles that float upon its pools now disappear, now form anew, but never endure long. And so it is with people in this world, and with their dwellings. In our dazzling capital, the houses of high and low crowd the streets, a jostling throng of roof and tile, and have done so down the generations. Yet ask if this is truly so, and you discover that almost no house has been there from of old. Some burned down last year, and this year were rebuilt. Others were once grand mansions gone to ruin, where now small houses stand. And it is the same with those that live in them. This is the way of things, no different from the bubbles on the stream.
And it wasn't just the literature of the early Kamakura period, infused with this reborn interest in Buddhist aesthetics, which flowered. There was a renaissance in the fields of architecture and sculpture too. At Japan's National Museum in Tokyo, crowds still flock to see the work of a Kamakura period sculptor, still as popular as ever after 8 centuries.
After the Genpei War, the city of Nara, the old imperial capital, was a smouldering heap. The grand old temples of Kofukuji, Todaiji and others had been reduced to ashes by the wrath of the Heike. But the new shogun, Yoritomo, a strict Buddhist and a devotee of the old temples of Nara, was determined to rebuild the city. So he put the carpenters, builders and sculptors of Nara to work. And luckily for Yoritomo, for Nara and for posterity, a fine school of Buddhist sculptors, the Kei school, was at work in Nara in the late 12th and early 13th centuries. And its finest exponent of Buddhist sculpture, Unke, was also the greatest sculptor in Japanese history.
Several Kamakura temples house statues carved by Unke. Sugimoto-dera, Kamakura's oldest temple, and Enmeiji, in the southeast of the city, are home to statues of Jizo, the Buddhist guardian of wayfarers and children. And at Ennoji Temple, a fearsome god never before carved by a Japanese sculptor.
When Unke, the greatest sculptor of the Kamakura period, was an old man, he lay on his deathbed with his kinfolk around him, and he slowly closed his eyes and sat up with a jolt. "Oh, we thought you were dead," said his kinfolk. "I was," said Unke. "I went down to the underworld. I met Emma, king of the underworld, judge of men's souls. And he said to me, 'Who are you?' And I said, 'I'm Unke.' He said, 'Unke the sculptor?' And I said, 'Yeah.' And he said, 'Why have you never done a sculpture of me?' And I said, 'I didn't know what you looked like.' And he said, 'You know what I look like now? Now get back and do one.' And so, the newly invigorated Unke made the sculpture, believed to be the first, of Emma, and lived to an even older age. Now, while the Asahina Pass and the rest of the 7 entrances into Kamakura were vital for Kamakura's military protection, they were also commercial conduits. Salt from what is now Tokyo Bay was carried through the Asahina Pass into town, and agricultural produce from here, the fields and hillsides of the Miura Peninsula surrounding Kamakura, was harvested and carried through the passes, and that, along with the bounty of the ocean, was what fed the Shogun's capital and its people. I'm here at the Olympus fish market in Kanazawa. Not just Kamakura, but all along the Shonan coast, around the Miura Peninsula, and into Tokyo Bay. There are fishing communities that go back centuries. They've even found shellfish middens here in Kanazawa that date back to the Jomon period, Japan's Stone Age. And it's this ability of local people, local communities, to continue to benefit and prosper from the bounty of the countryside and the ocean that links modern Kamakura with its economic and social and cultural past.
So with Kamakura, a thriving hive of economic activity and Japan's political and military hub by the end of the 12th century, Yoritomo could now focus on making Kamakura a city worthy of its status. For Yoritomo, this meant building. Wakamiya Ojidori Avenue, Dankazura and Tsurugo Gahachimangu Shrine itself still exist as Kamakura's outstanding examples of Yoritomo's building program.
Now, in addition to putting half of Japan to the sword, not just his enemies, but his own warriors, uncles, cousins, nephews, babies, even his own brothers, the first shogun of Kamakura was a deeply religious man. Any number of shrines in the Kamakura area stand as testament to times when he invoked or received the favour of the gods. Tendai Buddhist temples of his day benefited greatly from his patronage, and he even instigated a pilgrimage to Kannon, the goddess of mercy, a quality which he himself displayed very little of. When the future shogun was a boy, he was exiled by his enemies to a mountainous peninsula, not so different from this one.
where in a dream he was visited by the god of the harvest, who said, "Rise up and defeat your enemies." So he did, and later, when he was shogun, he built this shrine to honour the god of the harvest. And today, people who want to overthrow the government come here to pray. Just kidding. On Undercover TV tonight, we bring you an exclusive. Through this tunnel lies Kamakura's, near Japan's, oldest and most notorious money laundering operation.
According to legend, Yoritomo was visited in a dream by another god, Ugajin, who told him that if he dedicated a shrine in the mountains to the northwest of Kamakura, he would bring prosperity not only to himself, but also to the people. In later years, this legend changed and adapted, so people now believe that if you bring your money here and wash it in the holy spring, its value will double.
You've got to hydrate to accumulate. And as well as building these shrines to thank the gods for helping make him shogun, Yoritomo also held Kannon, the Buddhist goddess of mercy, in high esteem, even carrying an image of her into battle. Yoritomo instigated a pilgrimage, the 33 Kannon temples of Bando, still followed today, starting in Sugimoto-dera in Kamakura, passing through Hasedera, and then continuing on through the provinces of eastern Japan. But despite his good fortune, Yoritomo didn't enjoy being shogun for perhaps as long as he would have liked, and eventually fell into ill health. During his first bout of ill health when he was 42, Yoritomo prayed so fervently that he attributed his recovery to the gods. So now, many Japanese men aged 42 pray for good health in this year by going to their local temple. But later, aged 52, Yoritomo became ill again, and this time the luck of the gods was not with him. According to my excellent Kamakura companion, Kenji Cameo and Heather Wilson's guide to the temples and shrines of this city, mystery surrounds the death of the first ruling shogun, Yoritomo. Did he die of sickness? Was he injured after falling from his horse? Or was he murdered? It's insinuated that around this time the shogun was visited by visions of those who had died at his hands or on his orders. His brother, Yoshitsune, his Taira enemies, and their boy emperor, Antoku. What is known that on the 9th of February 1199, after returning from a ritual ceremony at the Sagami Bridge and complaining of chronic thirst, Minamoto no Yoritomo, the ruler of Japan, passed away. And his son, Yoritomo, was named second shogun. It was Masako who had this temple, Jufugaji, built the year after Yoritomo's passing to commemorate the life, deeds and spirit of the first ruling shogun. And at that time, it was also to hear Jufugaji that a young priest called Eisai came, soon after returning from China, and bringing with him two things new to the country. Not mere novelties, but things that would have a lasting impact on Kamakura, the samurai, and even on Japanese culture. Those two things were the tea plant and Zen Buddhism. This is the clan emblem of a family whose history in Kamakura goes back even further than the Minamoto. A family whose fortunes were indeed intertwined with the Minamoto right up until the time of Yoritomo and beyond. But a family who, after Yoritomo's passing, would take centre stage as guardians of the shogunate, not only against enemies in Japan, but enemies from overseas too. So Yoritomo, the first ruling shogun, was buried in his capital, Kamakura, Japan's new capital, home of its new warrior government, the shogunate. And although the title of shogun passed to Yoritomo's young son, Yorie, it was in fact Yorie's mother, Yoritomo's wife, Masako, and her family, the Hojo, who would provide stewardship for the shogunate through this early medieval period, maintaining Yoritomo's peace, overseeing a religious renaissance, and providing firm leadership when a new terrifying force from overseas, the Mongols, provided the greatest threat to Japan's independence in its long history. And you can find out more in the next episode of Kamakura, Rise and Fall of the Shoguns. Thank you for watching.